Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everybody. I'm Bruce Lawson. As Ryan said, this is called Whose Web Is It Anyway? And nothing I'm about to say is anybody's opinion other than my own. But don't sue me because I've really got no money. Um, so I'm Bruce and I'm an HTML alcoholic. I love the web. This is not actually the official logo for HTML. This is a brand of fashion in Japan, but I very much liked it. So I lay in front of the sign until security kicked me out of the department store. I've been mucking around on the web since about 2002, which is why I look this terrible. Primarily looking at accessibility of the web for people with disabilities. And I'm a consultant now working on expanding the web to be truly worldwide. Previously, I was deputy for CTO at Opera Software, so I know about browsers. But actually, I don't care about tech. I like nothing better than sitting around in glades of flowers, being a fin de siècle aesthete, reading poetry. Okay, well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but my background is not computer science or tech. My background is English literature, drama. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, not only because I'm a narcissist, but because it's vaguely relevant. I did a bit of work in computers in the late 80s and I got bored, so I went traveling the world. And I was head of primary at a primary school in Bangkok in Thailand when I got a little sick. And being rough and tough 30-year-old man, I didn't do anything about it, and I got sicker and sicker, and I went to hospital, and they diagnosed me as having something called multiple sclerosis. Now, this, I should have given you a content warning, but this is actually a photo, an MRI image of my brain, and there, circled in red, you can see one of my multiple sclerosis lesions. For those of you who know that my daughter's a professional tattoo artist, I should point out that she hasn't actually tattooed this on my brain. I've added it later in Photoshop. But in Thailand and in Southeast Asia, not many people get MS. It's pretty much a disease that's experienced by people who grow up away from the equator. So when I was in hospital, there wasn't much English language information about my condition. And the doctors very helpfully found an English language medical textbook and found lots of encouraging pictures of autopsied brains to cheer me up. So when I came out of the hospital and taught myself to walk again, I went to an internet cafe below my apartment in Bangkok. And I typed in multiple sclerosis into Alta Vista, which was like Google, but in black and white and powered by Steam. And I found this amazing site, Julie's Joint, it was called. And it was run by a woman who was in her 20s in London. She was diagnosed with MS 8 years before. And there were people from all around the world, New Zealand, Norway, Argentina, South Africa, all over Europe, just chatting to each other and supporting each other. And this blew my mind. This is in 99. This blew my mind because there was this unmoderated, democratic way of talking to people anywhere across the world, on whatever device or wherever they were. And I thought, I'm interested in this web. So any knowledge I have of tech is merely I've merely learned it because of my interest in the web always being open, free, and accessible to anybody. But because I lived in Southeast Asia, and I've been back many times, traveling in India and Cambodia and Indonesia, I've also got an interest in how people outside of the West can access the web. So I wrote a couple of books, don't know why I'm telling you that. I was involved with specifying HTML, and I was involved in helping the British Standard Institute write their standard. But the biggest problem I think we face is web pages keep getting bigger. Here we can see a recent screenshot from last month from the HTTP archive showing that the median desktop web page, not website, not web app, page is at 2.3 megabytes, and that's up 397.1% in the last decade. The median mobile page, not site, not app, page, is just over 2 megabytes, and that's up by 1,307%. And many people who are web developers don't notice this. There's an income disparity, even in the USA. The base salary, apparently, for a web developer in the US is $80,000 US. Many of you probably earn much more than that. That is more than the median household income in the US, which is, at the last time it was measured, $69,000 US. And given that 54% of households in the US are dual income, that means the average web developer earns more than two people in the US. Excuse me. My friend Alex Russell says this makes a device disparity. He says this is due to differences in replacement rates. If you as a developer have a laptop that's more than 3 years old and costs less than $700 new, odds are you're pretty anxious about it. But as a user, that's just the average. Real world gets slower from there. Microsoft Edge telemetry shows that something close to half of our users are on HDDs, not SSDs. But when was the last time you booted from spinning Rust? And there are other disparities as well. Here is a tale of two cities. You can see two identical icons of houses, one in green and one in a sort of purple color. Both of these houses pay $55 US a month for their internet. Both of these houses have their internet provided by AT&T. Both of these houses are in Kansas City, Missouri. Imagine my surprise when I learned that Kansas City isn't in Kansas. Anyway, where these houses differ is the house that I've painted green gets on average 300 megabits a second for their $55. The house that's in purple gets 55 megabits per second. The house in green with the fast internet has a median household income of $63,000 US. The house in purple has a median household income of $23,800 US. And not coincidental differences. The house in green is in an area where the white residents number 70%. The house in purple represents an area where only 1% of residents are white-skinned. Redlining from the 50s and 60s urban planning still exists in the digital world. That makes a huge disparity just in the kind of web that people can access, even within the same city. The original article is linked on this slide. If you go there, you'll see that these two houses are only 4 blocks apart in Kansas City. And then looking further afield, there are more people living inside this circle than there are living outside this circle. There's 4 billion people in Asia at the moment, and the World Health Organization, no, I'm lying, it's the UN, say that will increase to 5 billion by the year 2050. Africa is 1 billion people now, and it will increase to 2 billion by the year 2050. And by the year 2100, when your world population is expected to peak at 11 billion people, 5 billion of those people will live in Africa. For those predicting a Malthusian famine apocalypse, remember that the Mercator projection lies to us on maps. Africa is really, really big. This shows the perimeter of Africa with China, the US, India, and many European countries comfortably packed within Africa's borders. By the year 2100, half of the world will live in one of these 10 nations, and only one of which we would now call developed nation. And I don't like to use that terminology. I'm very influenced by Dr. Hans Rosling, who set up gapminder.org in Sweden. And he's persuaded the UN not to use developed and developing. He used the nomenclature of there are 4 levels of income in the world. Level 1 is made of people who earn less than $2 a day and live in extreme poverty. Level 2, people earn between $2 and $8 a day, and that's half of the world's population. Level 3 is made of people who live on between $8 and $32 per day. And the richest billion people on Earth live at level 4, where their income is more than $32 a day. A great way to visualize this, and again from the Gapminder website, is level 1, people have to dig for water in a well in their garden. Level 2, people can go somewhere and have access to clean water, which they fetch home. Level 3, there will be one standpipe serving your home. And level 4, you will have lots of taps or faucets inside your property. Level 1, transportation is you walk. Level 2, it's a bicycle. Level 3, it's a car, a motorbike, and level 4, it's a car. Cooking at level 1 is burning some wood to make a fire. Level 2 is a single ring gas burner. Level 3 is like this double ringed hob. And level 4 is an oven. And food will be something like polenta, grains, level 1. Vegetables are the little meat in level 2, meat and vegetables in 3, and in level 4, a much wider selection because refrigeration is common, which also means that it's more nutritious because things don't lose their nutrition so fast. And level 1, there are, well, you can see there's, for every 1 person at level 1, there's 3 at level 2, 2 at level 3, and 1 at level 4. But this is changing. This is a graph of how people have moved since the 1940s. Since the 1940s, we have moved a great many people of the world out of extreme poverty. A lot of this is to do with pesticides and more resilient strains of wheat. But probably the biggest bang for the buck is family planning being acceptable in many more countries. So we can see that whereas recently there were 4 billion at level 1 in Africa, 4 billion at level 1 in Asia, this is moving a great deal, and most people will be moving to level 2 or above by 2040. Soon, most rich consumers will be non-Westerners. By 2027, 50% of rich people will be in the West and 50% won't. Southeast Asia, the internet economy is expected to reach 200 billion in 2 years' time, which is a 6.5 increase over 10 years. E-commerce, all Southeast Asian countries will have a market worth at least 5 billion in each. Indonesia is expected to reach 46 billion alone. So what has this got to do with accessibility? Well, as we saw with Kansas City, Missouri, and the difference between tech workers and non-technical workers in an advanced economy like the States, across the world, there's considerable disparity in access to data and access to fast devices. So a gigabyte as a percent of monthly income in the US, a gigabyte of data is 0.135% of your income. It's 0.049% in Singapore. In Yemen, where I was born, 1 gigabyte of data costs 16% of your monthly income. It's 13% in Malawi, and it's 9.4% in Burundi. In short, the highest average cost for a gigabyte of data is 30,000% more than the cheapest average price in the world. And although probably most people in this room or these virtual room have an iDevice or an iPhone, the vast majority of the world is on Android. The median mobile speed in the UK is 28.5 megabits. In the States, it's 54.9. In Hong Kong, it's 112. In Rwanda, it's 0.8. In Cambodia, it's 1.3. India, it's 5, which is good, etc. And all of these countries have an overwhelming majority of Android devices, which is why big companies like Facebook, for example, do their level best to make sure that the data usage is small. Facebook Lite, Facebook said downloading a typical app with 20 megabytes APK can take more than 30 minutes on a 2G network, and the download is likely to fail before completion due to the flaky nature of the network. Twitter Lite is network resilient. To reach every person on the planet, which is surely the goal for us in accessibility, we need to reach people on slow and unreliable networks. Twitter Lite is interactive in under 5 seconds over most 3G on most devices. Most of the world is using 2 or 3G networks. A fast initial experience is essential. And this is what most of the world uses. This is a screenshot from Alibaba.com showing loads of 5G big screen Android devices at under $20 including free shipping. This is a device that I do a lot of testing on when I'm doing client work. The best-selling device last year, outselling all iPhones, was the Galaxy A12 from Samsung. It's a great device. Mrs. Lawson often uses it when she's traveling, and it costs £159 in the UK. So 189, 179 euros, about the same in US dollars. This is a high-powered device for lots of people in the world. It's the best-selling device. You really need to test on it. So I'm not afraid of modern frameworks like React. This is me in front of some graffiti I saw in Bucharest, Romania, saying React, run. I do lots of work with React. But I note, for example, that for me to say hello world in good old-fashioned HTML is 77 bytes. For me to do the same in React using the Create React app utility, after minifying it, optimizing it, and gzipping it, the same thing is 48 kilobytes. You cannot get it any smaller than that. So the way React works, for those of you who don't know, this is an example. This is a graphic I stole from Walmart. The server sends stuff to the browser. The browser downloads loads of JavaScript. The browser then executes the JavaScript and the React, and then the page is viewable and interactable. And this graphic shows a laptop doing the work. But translate that into a $20 Android device. Here we see it. It's a superhero because it's somebody's access to their family, to their bank, to their money, to their government, to their medical provider, and to the internet. It really is a superhero at $20. Now, when that device starts work, it gets information from a server. That's what browsers do. That's what all devices do. They love it. And then rather than showing some HTML, it has to download JavaScript, and then it has to execute the React, and that's making it tired. It's a slow device. It's low powered. And then by the time the page is viewable and interactable, the device has done a great deal of work, and it is interactable if you actually have any battery left. So the people who like React decided that it needs help. And what do you do if you need help? You ask Clippy, but Clippy's dead. And what happens if you bring something back from the dead? You get an evil zombie. So evil zombie help is server-side rendering. Here, the server sends HTML ready to be rendered to the device. Now that is viewable, but it can't be interacted with. So then we do it all again. The server sends it again to the device, which then has to parse the JavaScript and construct a DOM and make everything interactable. So we plug in our $20 Android device, and basically we have an exhausted Android device, and we've had to use loads more servers. And you cannot get it faster than this because you're asking the end user's device to do all of the legwork. Now you might think, no, oh yeah, but nobody would do this for just a normal website. This is only for big apps. Well, my good friend Adrian Rosselli pointed this out on Twitter a little while ago. The careers page on twitter.com, which is precisely a logo and an email address, Adrian analysed it, 37 requests and 1.2 megabytes delivered to display an email address, 665k of script, 240k for the font, 116k for the HTML, 105k for the CSS, and 31k imagery. If you've ever gone to just a plain blog or a plain, good old-fashioned bread and butter, text, images, and a couple of form fields, and seen the loading spinner, you know that somebody's using a framework for this, a client-side JavaScript framework. And the reason why they do is because they're tooled up to use it. And it's hard to make one page just a snowflake. And you can say what you like about React, and I frequently do. Nobody can deny that it caused a magnificent renaissance in loading spinner design. There's nothing inherently inaccessible about React. Fundamentally, it delivers HTML. It might do it in a circumnavigatory route, but it delivers HTML, which is rendered by the browser. You have to make sure you choose the right components. That is one that produces the HTML nav class equals nav rather than div class equals nav. This is eminently doable, but unfortunately, I think a lot of full stack front-end developers have been trained to just grab a component or just assume that somebody else has done the work and check the accessibility. And whereas you don't have to make single page apps with React, many of them are, and you need to manage focus. I've seen on a contract I'm working on at the moment, somebody hits a button to navigate, but it doesn't refresh the screen. So no new HTML title comes in. The DOM isn't refreshed, so a screen reader doesn't know that anything's changed. And so part of the page is changed, and that's visible to a sighted user, but the DOM isn't, a screen reader user isn't alerted to this. You can do it, but you have to remember to. Now, for mobile, the situation's worse. For mobile, there's a flavor of React called React Native, and this has nothing to do with HTML at all. It's basically a Rube Goldstein machine that lights birthday candles via running rats, balloons are on fire, etc. The vendor, Facebook, when React Native was launched, said the accessibility API for React and React Native enables you to make any React-powered experience usable by someone who may use assistive technology. However, 6 years later, when they had an audit, we found that the React Native APIs provide core support for accessibility. However, we also found many core components do not yet fully utilize platform accessibility APIs, and support is missing for some platform-specific features, which is quite a change. This is a little video of me scrolling through the Facebook, the React Native accessibility backlog on Facebook's notice board. Here's a bug that I raised in July 2021. You cannot, if you have Android, but with an external keyboard, you cannot put the focus into text fields. Now, you'd think that would be pretty important for almost all kinds of form filling. I thought it's pretty important, so I reported the error in July 2021. It hasn't been fixed yet, and that's fine. Facebook, the vendor, they have their own priorities. And my priorities are not Facebook's priorities, and there's nothing I can do about that because I've chosen to use this middle layer. But let's look at who does have our priorities at heart. All of the browsers have great accessibility. HTML5 accessibility set up by Steve Faulkner tests Chrome 98.5%, Edge 100%, Firefox 94%, Safari 97%. And the reason why browsers have the interests of accessibility at heart is they often have huge 508 compliance requirements that they've voluntarily taken because they do work with governments, and also because they want to serve their users. The browsers do have our interests at heart. So why don't we make mobile apps with the web? Well, we can. It's called progressive web apps. Progressive web apps are like websites plus plus, or websites with superpowers. They can save to a home screen in iOS and Android. They can open full screen. They can work offline using service workers. This has been around for years. And a great thing about PWAs is they're an instant install, an instant update. If you want to update them to fix a security bug or whatever, you push it to your server and the next person who comes to your app gets that update. And you've seen examples: Twitter, Wordle, a farm bound made by my friend Stuart Langridge is a PWA. On the left, there it is in Android. You can see it's full screen, immersive. In the middle, there it is on an iPhone. And on the right, there it is in Opera Mini, a proxy browser that many people in network constrained environments use. It doesn't look like an app. It looks like a website, but it's fine. It still works, and nobody gets a worse experience, and many people get a better experience. A Google product manager called Penny McLaughlin told me a typical Android app size is 11 megabytes, but PWAs are in the range of 700 to 900 kilobytes. 3 megs is a good working estimate of an average first page load. Of course, we know that great web apps can be a lot smaller when best product practices are followed. And that's why we saw the first raft of progressive web apps in about 2016, 2017 came out of Asia and Africa, because they know that this serves their markets better. And progressive web apps are set to get even better. Jake Archibald, often known as Jank Architect or Jaffa the Cake, of Chrome DevRel, announced that single-page app of view transitions are in stable Chrome. And this is a great way of making native-like attractive transitions between pages without JavaScript, so faster and more performant. I'm delighted that about 3 hours ago, Simon Peters from Mozilla said that they are interested in implementing view transitions. So why don't we do this? Why don't we use progressive web apps instead of React Native? Well, the reason is Apple always said there's an app for that. Those of us who are very much into the web say there's an API for that. If you can't do something, if you can't talk to something on a device, we like to make an API. Apple like you to make an app. So if you look at lots of APIs that are in Chromium or Firefox that are not in Safari, it's many, many of the things you would want to make progressive web apps. During the pandemic, I was using a really good service called Echo Pharmacy to order my repeat medication, so I didn't have to clog up my general practitioner. And I was using a website, and it kept saying to me, why not use our app? So I asked them, but why? The website allows me to place and track my meds. Why clog up my device with an app? Is it for push notifications? And the CEO got back to me and said, hey, Bruce, you're right about push notifications. Beyond that, our app and website have feature parity. So it's really about what you prefer. In other words, Echo Pharmacy had to make a website and a web app and also an iOS app because of push notifications, because on Apple devices, push notifications are allowed for native web apps, but not yet for web apps using Safari. And the reason for this is Apple's App Store rules. Rule 2.5.6, apps that browse the web must use the appropriate WebKit framework and a WebKit JavaScript. In other words, anything that calls itself a browser on iOS or iPad no matter what name it has, is merely a branded skin over the WebKit that Apple allows on the device. So here we can see Fred from Scooby-Doo lifting the mask off Firefox on iPhone to reveal Apple Safari, lifting the mask of Edge on iPhone to reveal Apple Safari, lifting the mask of Chrome on iPhone to reveal Apple Safari. It's an illusion of competition. Many, many web developers don't know that these things are just branded skins on WebKit. And even then, Apple self-preferences Safari. So Firefox on iOS cannot install Wordle to home screen, even though it uses the same engine as Safari, which can install Wordle to the home screen. But in the words of, excuse me, the car park outside my favorite multi-story car park in Birmingham, change is possible. The Fab Four, here you see me, my friend and colleague Stuart Langridge, and two developers who until recently have chosen to remain anonymous because they were worried that Apple would punish them and damage their business. We got tired of asking Apple to do the right thing, so we went to the law. We set up a group called openwebadvocacy.org. We wanted an end to Apple's ban on third-party browsers. We wanted deep system integration on Android and iOS for web apps, so that anything a native app on those devices can do should be available to web apps. So we've recently, last week, we briefed the Competition and Markets Authority. This is the antitrust organization in the United Kingdom. They're governmental, so they have this very boring looking logo, but actually they're really cool and switched on. So I've made them this logo, which they are welcome to use, showing the more groovier aspects of market regulation in the UK. The CMA said browsers are powered by an engine. Apple bans alternative to its own browser, a restriction that is unique to Apple. The CMA is concerned this severely limits the potential for rival browsers to differentiate themselves from Safari. This restriction also seriously inhibits the capability of web apps, depriving consumers and businesses of the full benefits of this innovative technology. We also talked to the European Union, and they produced their Digital Markets Act, which is now law, but isn't yet being enforced to allow tech companies to make the appropriate changes. Again, this is the screenshot of a very boring PDF, so I've made them a slightly nicer logo. They're welcome to use this. And by the way, anybody, I'm available for freelance design work. So the DMA, this is law across the EU, says gatekeepers, that is companies over a certain size, and certainly Apple is a gatekeeper, can no longer rank their own products or services higher than those of others. It can no longer reuse private data collected during a service for purposes of another service. They can no longer establish unfair conditions for business users, and they can no longer pre-install certain software applications. And they can no longer require app developers to use certain services in order to be listed in app stores. So this is an end to the Apple browser ban in the EU coming soon. We've also briefed the Australian regulators, the Japanese regulators, and several organizations in the US. The EU have said when gatekeepers operate and impose web browser engines, they are in a position to determine the functionality and standards that will apply not only to their own web browsers, but also to competing web browsers and in turn to web software applications. Gatekeepers should be prohibited from requiring end users to use such services. And this legislation has teeth. In the EU, if a gatekeeper violates the rules laid down in the legislation, it risks a fine of up to 10% of its worldwide turnover. For a repeat offence, a fine of up to 20% of its worldwide turnover may be imposed. And I mean, 10% of Apple's worldwide turnover, that's more than an accessibility professional gets paid even. Huge amount of money. Apple employees are very sad. Do we really want to live in a world where 95% is Chrome? That would be a horrible future for the web. We need more voices, not fewer. And I agree. We need more voices, not fewer. And we need more voices on iOS. Lest anybody misinterpret what I'm saying, I want Apple to set Safari free. If WebKit, the underlying engine, can run on Windows, Android, Linux, as well as Mac and iOS, if Apple allowed competition and had a really great Safari running on Windows and Android and Linux, Apple has brand recognition, a marketing budget, and talented engineers. They're the only people on earth, I think, who can give Google Chrome a run for its money. So in short, and in conclusion, Bruce says, consider making a progressive web app next time for cross-device joy, tasty HTML semantic goodness, and accessibility. Until the Apple browser ban is ended, use something like capacitor.js to get it into the App Store. I recently converted a React-based and PWA from my old employers and bagged it up using Capacitor, which is free, and that gave me an installable app. But when I inspected that app and surfed it using VoiceOver, I was very glad to see that it had all of its HTML semantics. So whereas React Native only has heading or not a heading, PWA bagged up with Capacitor had heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And I humbly ask you to follow and support open web advocacy, because the web is not just computers. The web is not clouds. The web is not a series of tubes. The web is and belongs to these women in an African village. It's this blind chap on a campus in Toronto. It's these ladies I met on a bus in India. It's this lady in a wheelchair on the streets of Taipei. It's this guy and his granddaughter working a farm in Latin America. It's this gentleman on the New York Metro. The web belongs to everyone, as Tim Berners-Lee said. With that, thanks and snogs. I've been Bruce Lawson. Other Bruce Lawsons are available. You can hire me, known to cause nausea in some jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Fantastic presentation. We've got really active chat group here with some good questions that I'll send your way. There's one common criticism, I would say, of your artwork, and that's there's not enough of the Monty Python foot present.
I should take that on board for next time. Thank you.
And then I think the other collective aha moment that was particularly impressionable in chat is so many folks, I think, have been turned on to the more affordable Android test devices that you mentioned. So thank you very much for that.
Welcome.
For those of you watching right now, remember to go to that questions tab to enter in questions, and you can upvote questions to make sure that they get prioritized. Bruce, the first question I have for you, what can an individual developer do to help close the digital divide?
Honestly, you can grab yourself a Samsung Galaxy A12. You could probably get one for $50 on eBay. Test with it. And when you're showing your teammates or your bosses or your clients, show them on that, because it's undeniable. And that is by no means the lower end of the market. You know, this is $150, £150 worth of device, not $20. But if it's running super sluggishly on that, which is a very common device in Europe and the UK, you know, it's not a level 1 device, you can bet it's going to be bad for those other consumers, and never think that those people won't be your customers one day.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Someone's asking for a clarification. Is the gatekeeper law enforced yet? If not, when will enforcement begin?
It's the law, but it's not enforced yet, because obviously changing the way an operating system works is non-trivial. From the top of my head, beginning of 2024, but I'll look it up and I'll send a tweet and a toot on Mastodon to clarify that. And you can ask me questions there in the next few days if you want, folks. I have to be somewhere after this, but I will be online and answering questions tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bruce. A common question here with a lot of upvotes is, I hope
where do I buy my shirts?
No. I'll let you know if that one comes up. Someone is asking, what are your thoughts on accessibility and security?
There was a glitch there. Accessibility and
security.
I think they're both jolly good things. I don't know what other thoughts I would have. Do you mean by opening up iOS, we make things less secure, or do you?
Yeah, so it's not stated in the question, but if I were to take a guess at the intention, is security also has an imposing impact on the digital divide as well, right? So how do you balance accessibility, security, speed?
I think that's a great question, framed like that. I don't know the answer, but the only person who can make that decision is the consumer at the end of it. You know, we've had a lot of pushback from people saying, well, if we allow other browsers on iOS, it's going to make it less secure. Now, we can demonstrate that Safari is the browser that takes the longest to fix security patches anyway. But also, you know, it's a choice. Like, I don't install certain large, well-known messaging apps on my device. I use their websites because websites live in a sandbox and that's secure. I have no wish to give Mr. Zuckerberg unfettered access to my device. Other people much prefer the convenience of that. And whereas I would love to say they are mad, evil, and wrong, I can't say that because A, that'd be rude and I'm British, but also, you know, everybody has their own balance of where they are. You know, some people prefer making things super secure, even if it inhibits their own convenience. Other people have a balance elsewhere, but that's not, you as a developer are never in a position to make that decision for your end users.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Why do you think so many dev teams are keen on the latest JavaScript libraries and not necessarily using progressive web?
It's very simple. If you go to your boss and say, we can make this as a progressive web app because HTML accessibility is a solved problem, which it is. It doesn't mean that everybody does it, but it's a solved problem. And it will be cheaper and it will work everywhere. And the boss says, yeah, how do I get an app in the iOS App Store because I have an iOS device? And you say, well, you can't at the moment. Your boss or your client probably says, well, no, then, because iOS users, where they're a minority, they're the biggest spenders. And who am I to argue with the mighty hand of capitalism, Ryan? Well, I'm happy to argue with the mighty hand of capitalism, but it's a longer argument that we can have in this Q&A. But that's why we went to the regulators, so that the mighty hand of capitalism could actually force competition upon those unwilling to compete fairly, so that at least people can make an informed decision.
Maybe expanding on that a little bit further from a training perspective, there's a lot of folks in chat talking about how when brought on as a junior developer, React is the standard, and semantic HTML is often forgotten or deprioritized. What advice would you give to folks in that situation?
There was literally nothing to prevent a React-based website serving up semantic HTML goodness. There's nothing to prevent it. The choice of using inaccessible React component libraries is a choice made by whoever it is who chooses the libraries for your team. And if they don't think to examine the accessibility of that component library, then they are building in inaccessibility by the sin of omission, if you like, but somebody will be accountable for that. Make sure it's not you. You as a junior developer can say, well, can't we tweak this component and fork it? So instead of saying div class equals nav, it says nav class equals nav, or div class equals nav role equals nav. And hey presto, in a few bytes, you've got some accessibility built in. And as a junior developer, if you do say it, it's pretty much guaranteed that within 1 year they were building a massive golden statue of you in the office car park and worshipping you on your birthday. Pretty much guaranteed, not completely guaranteed. No, but do it. Be the person who says that thing, and everybody goes, "Wow, this guy, this person's really thinking outside the box. This person's got the bigger view."
Bruce, thank you so much for your presentation, for taking the time.
Ryan, I buy them on the internet. I know you were going to ask.
I think there is some minor demand in the chat for you to play us out on the keys behind you, if you wouldn't mind.
Not a problem. Oh, I love accessibility. It is really good for me. Thank you very much. I've been
fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate your time. The recording will be available almost immediately after this live stream concludes. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.